Hello everyone. We'll be starting the second session on introduction to environment impact assessment. We will study what are the steps in environment impact assessment. So basically, there are certain steps through which we do the environment impact assessment, and the key steps are: first, it is project screening. Scoping is the second step. Assessment, third step. Fourth is impact management. Then, after impact management, environment impact assessment report is being developed, which is taken to the public and is being discussed for public participation. Then it is being reviewed, final decision is taken, and then the last step is the monitoring part. So, but how these steps are being done, what does actually these steps means, how the report is developed, what kind of public participation is involved, what are the aspects in which things are being reviewed, all these things will be explained to you in the slides ahead, one by one. The first step which comes while we do the environment impact assessment is the screening part. What does basically screening means? Screening is the first stage of EIA process, which results in a key EIA decision, namely either to conduct the assessment based on the likely significant impacts or not conduct it in any anticipated absence of such impact. Screening needs to follow specific procedures often described in the legislation so that all the projects follow the same process. So basically, what does screening? The very first step, which is all about screening, it tells the policymakers or the key decision makers whether do we need to really go ahead with the assessment part, or we just don't want to conduct the assessment at the very beginning itself. Also, the screening step has to follow a predefined or specific procedures which are well described in the legislation, as I have already described you in my previous presentation, that there are laws, mandates and act which is available with many of the countries. And so when law or act is there are procedures predefined. Why procedures and these legally, why this process is binded? Because so that every project, it involves a lot of money, every project has the mass impact on environment, so every project should go through the same serious steps uh, for the screening part. So that is why these steps are already covered through legislation. Now, what are the key contributions of screening to a good EIA? What basically what screening contributes to? It facilitates informed decision making by providing clear, well structured, and factual analysis of the effects and consequences of proposed action. For example, if a decision is taken that a big multi-story mall is being constructed in a farmland, then in the very beginning of the screening stage, it will be based on well structured factual analysis, and after the end of this step, policymakers can decide what will be the consequence and effect of constructing a mall in a agricultural land, and how much it is going to impact the environment, or so pros and cons will be understood by this process. Also, the second important contribution of this step is it influences both the project selection and also the policy design by screening out environmentally or socially unsound proposals as well as modifying feasible action. So in the very beginning only, they policymakers get to know whether any proposal, any mass infrastructure or any tourism proposal, is it under the range of environmental friendly, or it is just socially unsound proposal, so that if it is like way too unsound proposal, it will be rejected at the very beginning of screening step. Again, screening is done by the project developers often using a set of criteria determined by responsible agencies. So there are agencies which actually they have work to do this, to carry out EIA assessments only. And what kind of things, what do they basically do? It is important that screening can be done as early as possible in the development of a proposal, in order for the proponent and other stakeholders to be aware of possible EIA obligations. So once the developers, they know that okay, we are coming up with a mall in an agricultural land, these are the consequences, pros and cons of constructing a mall in an agricultural land, you know. So in that case, they will be well aware that what EIA obligations do they need to follow in order to correct their mandate. Because as we said, that not all the projects basically go there and then they get rejected, but in many of the, or most of the cases, they try to minimize the risk. So they are well aware what actually what should be the action taken to minimize the risk. It is also important that screening be applied systematically, consistently, so that the same decision would be reached if others did the screening. So it should not be a very open-ended process, but it should be closed-ended process, which has step-by-step, process, so that whosoever undertakes this step, the result should come following a systematic and consistent step. For example, a math statement, whosoever will do the math statement, math calculation, it will come arrive to the same answer. So procedure is very important. Most often, a simple categorization, in many of you must have studied about this, we try to categorize under ABC. Basically means, I'll tell you, either in the category of A, B, C, or it is categorized under 1, 2, 3. So these categories help proponents and licensing agencies decide when a whole EIA is needed. So, for example, what are the criterias on which screening is done? I've just given certain examples. Will there be a large change in environmental conditions? Will new features be out of scale with the existing environment? Will the effect be unusual in the area or particularly complex? Will the effect extend over a large area? Will many people be affected? So these are certain socio environmental kind of analysis which screening committee or the licensing agency needs to carry out. Intercountry examples of screening. So this is the intercountry examples. You can see that Belize has regulation list that type of project that require, do not require, and may require EIA. So basically, it is also defined which type of project basically will undergo the whole process of EIA, which can be exempted depending on the size and the location. So proponents should apply early to the government agency to determine whether the project require EIA or AMP. In Costa Rica, project types, criteria. So it's a two-stage screening. Legislation list the type of activities, projects, and work that actually require EIA. And the second part, there are application forms, namely D1 and Form D2, which depending upon the project category has to be filled. So, and in case of Dominican Republic, again, it's a it's a two-stage process for screening only. So, law defines the type of projects, works, and activities that require EIA and determines the type of study required for each category. According to the potential environmental impact for projects not included in the list, national agency determines if any EIA is needed. So, basically, even if there is certain activity or project which is not included in any of these category, then government agency or the national agency also further decides whether they need to go ahead with EIA or not. In Ecuador, it is only one step process, and the legislation defines the type of project that require an EIA. Proponent must register the project in the online environmental system. So in Ecuador, they have online environmental system which is known as SUIA, to request a certification of project location in relation to conservation areas and forest protected areas. El Salvador, again, one step process. So, legislation defines the type of project that require an EIA. Group A basically signifies that does not require the presentation of any form. Group B, EMP will be conducted, and Group B1 means EMP will be conducted, Group B2 means EIA will be conducted. Guatemala legislation lists different type of activities that require an EIA, including hotels of a certain size, marinas, desalination plants, hydroelectric projects, and coastal development. Second step comes the scoping part. Now, after the initial screening comes the scoping part. Scoping is a critical step in the presentation of an EIA, as it identifies the issues that are likely to be of most importance during the EIA and eliminates those that are of little concern. Scoping is a systematic exercise that establishes the boundaries of your EIA and sets the basis of analysis which you will be conducting at each stage. So it basically, in under this step, it identifies all the relevant issues, factors, including the cumulative effect, social impact, health risk. So what all can be, can occur by go ahead of a project is listed down, facilitating meaningful public engagement and review in at least two stages of the process. Once when scoping the impact and issues to be considered, and again during the presentation of initial finding of EIA, including the non-technical summary. This step also determines the appropriate time and space of the boundaries of EIA. It identifies the important issues to be considered in an EIA, such as setting the baseline and included alternatives. So here comes the second step, scoping, under which all possible factors, cumulative effects, social impact, health risk are being enlisted. There has to be the boundaries fixed. What will be the time? What will be the space under which this EIA will be conducted? So all these things will be taking place. Key approaches in scoping. It determines the key aspects and criteria for evaluating the significance of environmental and socio-economic impacts. Include creating a list of, please understand that in this step, we basically they create a list of environmental, biological, socio-economic resources and issues that are important to be considered if they go ahead with a certain project, such as water, soil, land use, biodiversity, people access to water, land, food, and energy. Second step under this stage is public consultation. So this is a critical part of EIA in many LAC countries. It is mandated by legislation. So you have to carry out a public consultation if you are going ahead with any major project which affects the environment. Selecting appropriate baseline. So baseline surveys and investigations should be carried out on the issues that have significant environmental effect. So some kind of surveys, investigations needs to be done, so that they can provide an understanding of existing conditions linked to specific year. So there has to be a base year or period. Decide about a timeline that will allow for predictions of how the project may change the key environmental component, number of years of project operation, allow for predictions of how adverse effects can be mitigated and beneficial effects enhanced, number of years needed until the mitigation responses are implemented and start making impacts, provide a sound basis for the design and evaluation of post EIA studies. Or example, it includes the early monitoring process. Defining alternatives. During the scoping process, alternatives to a proposal can be generated or refined, either directly or by reference to the key issues identified. A comparison of alternatives which help determine the best method of achieving project objectives, which minimizing the environmental impact and proposing the least harmful and the most environmental and socially friendly solution. So for example, see why this is important, because under this stage only, engineers or the we can say technical people involved in any kind of project team, they will find what will be the best method to achieve the project objectives. For example, many of you might be knowing that there is a Xavier airport coming near UP. Now that the whole belt where that airport will be constructed will definitely have adverse effect on the environment. Under the scoping process, under the scoping stage, they will get to know what is the best method. Let's say if there is some construction happening on 5 kilometer road strip, and instead of 5 kilometer, they can change the layout of the project, and if it is crossing certain project forest area, that can be skipped. So I'm just giving you certain vague examples so that you can get how this process is undertaken, why this is important, and how technical people use different methods to minimize the effects of environmental hazard, so that to minimize the environmental hazard if any major project is being discussed. Terms of reference, TOR, or a formal scoping report may be issued. This is especially useful if the issues or processes are controversial. So if there is any wildlife sanctuary being covered under that project, there is any river which is which whose water will be affected, quality of water will be affected, soil is affected, so all those things will be considered and taken into account while preparing the TOR. How is scoping conducted? So funneling down. First of all, set up the team of experts that will conduct the EIA, describe the project area and the area of project influence, outline the project alternatives for preparation, implementation, and closure, conduct public meetings and stakeholder consultations, integrate their comments, collected feedback into project planning and the alternatives which can be, which can be given to mitigate the environmental hazards, outline a set of environmental, biological, and socio-economic resources and issues that will be addressed in the assessment. Define a set of criteria to assess the planned project development, identify the project impact during in all the stages, list the significant and non-significant impacts and explain why, identify a set of data for baseline descriptions and potential additional data collection need, start inserting this information in the appropriate section of the. Third step is the impact assessment and mitigation. So impact assessment is the core part of EIA. At this step, a detailed assessment of the planned project and selected alternatives compared to the baseline conditions is performed. This is done by using qualitative descriptions such as high, medium, low impact, and quantitative descriptions such as indicating the cubic meters of water withdrawn, sewage produced, and the pollutant released. Now, this is very important in impact assessment and mitigation. Quantitative descriptions and qualitative descriptions both are taken into consideration. Qualitative description, as they say, they cannot quantify, but they can say that environment there will be high effect, project will affect the environment highly or medium manner, or there will be low impact. But at the same time, they also need to quantify these descriptions by saying that okay, this many cubic meter of water will be withdrawn, this much of cubic meter sewage will be produced, pollutant will be released into the air. So they have to quantify also. Now, this step, it provides a clear and itemized list of relevant impact on the environment and also the people, including the cumulative effect, social impact, and the health risk. It also outlines any cumulative effect bringing together identified impact on environment, society, and health. Based on the results of the impact assessment, it lists the adverse effect of proposed actions. A detailed list of mitigation actions is also identified. Because, see, this is the beauty of this tool, that once you are aware about qualitative and quantitative issues which any project will have, which will lead to environmental issues, there and then, the team start finding the actions, how to mitigate those risks, how to counter those risks which will be created. Types of impact assessment and mitigation. So, for example, these are the organizations. Let's say Inter-American Development Bank and EIA needs to account for indirect and cumulative impact and include associated facilities. It needs to include mitigation measures to address adverse impact. Bank financed operations require mitigation measures, and for impact that cannot be fully mitigated, compensation and offsets should be implemented. The second consultation should preferably occur when the impact assessment is being reviewed in order to inform, gather comments, and adjust the assessment and corresponding environmental and social management plan. The process must have the necessary budget, time, and human resources to ensure good technical quality. When the project team considered is it necessary, the bank may complement and the socio-cultural evaluation process. So, see, you can see what step-by-step processes happen. So in this case, even like TD Dam, when TD Dam was constructed, there were many local people. They were losing their household. Their houses were coming under the TD Dam construction area. So what was done? Under the project of TD Dam, these people were relocated from their places to the mainland. So there was a whole colony which was developed by government, and they were relocated from those hilly regions to those colonies in Dehradun, and people were shifted. That okay, and that was given to them free of cost, because this is what they are saying, that compensation or offsets should also be implemented. Similarly, World Bank and European Union also have their process of carrying out impact assessment and how to mitigate. What are the steps of conducting impact assessment? Detailed assessment of impact of project phases on environment, social, economic, systems, and others as requested by legislation. Wherever legislation is given, so they will follow the legislation. Based on the complete assessment, analysis of cumulative impact, consolidation of identified list of impact to groups, those who are similar in nature, and then they will identify the mitigation actions to eliminate or reduce the risk, identify specific mitigation measures to reduce cumulative. So this is the whole steps, how the process is taken place, and how the step-by-step process is taken in that case. In the next session, we will take a step ahead after what are the processes after the assessments. Now, then the fourth step comes the impact management. So impact management is defined as a series of plans and protocols that are part of EIA process and also continue after project implementation. So that's the important point, that the impact management also continues after the project implementation to manage and monitor, identify mitigation measures and other risks such as technological failures, natural disasters that may occur over the project lifetime. The analysis of the impact and mitigation measures carried out in the previous step will likely identify a number of changes in the project design, implementation, and closure. It will also require additional action plan to manage risk and carry out monitoring. So what happens, let's say example, uh, for the construction of a mall, type A was planned. But after doing EIA, they found that it will have major impact, environmental effects, and then they identify that risk will be mitigated. So definitely, what they propose to do will the project design, when it is being implemented, there will be changes, because the changed project design will also include the mitigation measures. So this is why this process is very important, because they also, when they implement the project, they try to implement the mitigation plan as well. How this impact management is conducted: summary of potential impacts of the proposal is enlisted, linkages to the national, subnational legislation to set environmental commitments threshold for acceptable impact, and to frame the mitigation and monitoring measures is identified. Then description of recommended mitigation measures. So the whole description has to be given by the technical team. What kind of mitigation measures they are suggesting, how their suggestion will ensure that the risk is reduced. Then statement of their compliance and relevant standard has to be given. Allocation of resources and responsibility for plan implementation of the project is being done. Schedule is prepared for complete action taken report. Program for monitoring and auditing is also enclosed there, that there will be a regular monitoring and auditing plan attached. And then finally, and the most important thing, contingency plan. If there are some natural, social, or some urgent emergency situation which arises during that uh, around that project, how are you going to take care through this contingency plan? EIA report. Once you have completed the assessment, mitigation measures, and related management plan, this step includes pulling the information together into a comprehensive report using the TOR. What are the aspects of a good EIA report? It should be well structured and uses of non-technical language. Whatsoever, your project is technical in nature, but the EIA report should be non-technical in language, and it should be supported by data and well executed analysis, which is easy to be understood by all the policymakers, because generally policymakers are not the technical people. It also provides information that is helpful and relevant for decision making, results in the satisfactory prediction of the adverse effect of proposed action and their mitigation using controversial and customized techniques. These are the checkpoints of EIA reports. That an EIA report describes the proposed construction of an industrial plant but omit information about construction of a pipeline and other facilities to transport and handle raw material and finished product to and from the plant. Shortcoming: that the description of proposal does not cover key features. It describes, so the second thing, it report described the proposed construction of a coal-fired power plant using surface water as a cooling medium. It does not divulge that the surface water body is already used by other industrial activities for this purpose to the limit of its cooling capacity. Key problems affected by the proposal are not described. So these are the some certain example of EIA report on the left hand side, and right hand side is being shown that these are the shortcomings. So your checkpoints for EIA report is that your EIA report should not have these shortcomings if you are preparing these EIA reports. Next point comes the review of EIA report and licensing. The the review is the final check on the quality of EIA report submitted to obtain a project license. So your project will only be licensed by government if there is, EIA report and it is being reviewed. Often this process leads to the requirement for additional information on potential impact mitigation measure or other aspects. So what happens? Policymakers, they go ahead and reviews the reports, and they understand that okay, there are certain impacts, and then it may happen that they can again ask certain questions, that how are you trying to mitigate this issue? No, maybe the mitigation plan, we are not satisfied, how are you ensuring? So certain questions can be asked by the policymakers. The ultimate purpose of the EIA is to provide critical inputs for decision making. See, finally, the decision will be taken whether to go ahead with the project or not, and it's a major decision. So, to take that major decision, such information is very much important, and there can be to and fro of questions and the information from the decision making side. They can ask lot many questions from the project developer side. They have to answer or provide information to those decision makers. The review is carried out to confirm the quality of information and method used in EIA, and that the EIA report addresses all the critical and cumulative impact as well as relevant mitigation measures. So, for example, decision makers need to see that, okay, EIA report, does it also cover all the possible major issues, or there has been some fact hiding process, that, for example, there is a piece of land and region which comes under seismic zone, it's a earthquake prone area, whether that information has been hidden by the decision makers and they have asked to construct a multi-story building. So such kind of cross checking, the team of policymakers needs to do. Approaches to EIA reporting and review. So there, these are the steps and basically the approaches how the reporting and review is to be done. Internal review, then it comes to external review, using information from public comment, identifying the review criteria, determining remedial options. There are three remedial options. What can be done? It can be acceptable, it can be partially acceptable, or it can be sent back saying that no, the report is or the remedial option is deficient, it is not actually addressing the concern. Steps of conducting EIA review. So the first step is that identify the deficiencies in the EIA report using the TOR, relevant guidelines, criteria, and information on standards by national agencies and comparable EIA report. Second step, focus on any shortcomings in the EIA report will be highlighted. Identify gaps and the areas that require further information and improvement in the methods based on suggested protocols. Look at key gaps in the areas that prevent qualified decision making. If no serious omissions are found, that should be stated clearly. Even if there is any issues found, or there is no issues found, that has to be clearly stated. Step 3, recommend how and when any serious shortcomings are to be remedied in to facilitate informed decision making and appropriate measures for project implementation. Monitoring, environmental monitoring during the project implementation. So when the project is under implementation, it is being constructed, then there has to be environmental monitoring to be done. What say? Because in many of the cases, and especially in our country, even if you have prepared and taken approval from EIA, you said that okay, these are the impact, we will take 5-6 steps so that these things can be mitigated. But who will ensure that actually the organization has tried to mitigate the risk? There has to be a continuous monitoring, and also continuous monitoring in terms of environmental monitoring, that the environmental and the social impact which were identified way back on paper is actually being taken care in in physical form. So it monitors indicators that measure the impact on the environment and communities in context of mitigation measures are critical to ensure fulfillment of the commitments made in the approved EIA. So EIA was approved, that's very clear. That's why the project is being implemented. But whether the approved EIA is being implemented on ground or not, that has to be taken care by the continuous monitoring, and this monitoring takes place when the project is under the implementation stage. Now, these are the protocols of monitoring across major international banks. So, for example, World Bank, if World Bank is developing certain project, so they will during the project implementation, the borrower reports on compliance with measures agreed upon with the bank, including implementation of any EMP, the status of mitigation measures, and the findings of monitoring program. The bank bases supervision on the findings and recommendations of the EA, including the legal agreements, any EMP, and any other project documents. Similarly, Asian Development Bank borrowers must submit semi-annual report on the implementation of EMP. The bank will conduct annual environmental missions on all aspects of the EMP and environmental covenants. ADB creates a project completion report evaluating the EMP, loan covenants, and assessing the performance of the executing agencies. Similarly, let's say Inter-American Development Bank, so IDB, incorporates into project preparation, approval, and implementation the mechanisms necessary to assess compliance with the safeguard requirement of the operation, but leaves vague the actual step it will take to achieve the end. The profile states that IDB will specify in loan contract document the responsibility and the timing of project monitoring to be carried out by executing agency, but does not require that monitoring reports by executing agency and the project sponsor be made available to the public. So in many states, such reports are available for public viewing or and commenting, but in many of the countries or many of the international banks do not allow for public to comment and to see or to make access to. Steps to conduct monitoring: identify the focus areas to be considered for monitoring plan, which will be based on the impact, mitigation measures, and other issues from the contingency plan. Select of a long list of indicators for the focus area, such as those on population, health, and the natural elements used by the population, for example, soil, drinking water, etc. Prioritize a core set of indicators based on agreed criteria. Identify data collection protocol. Develop data interpretation method and creating a reporting template. Schedule activities. Evaluate program and personnel costs. And also define personal responsibility.